been in development?
So I wrote the pilot on spec, and that was probably, I started writing it about 3 years ago. Sold the pilot to Freeform 2.5 years ago. We shot the pilot last October, almost exactly a year ago. And then now we're deep in production on the series.
TV's turned into the movie business suddenly. It takes 4 years to get a show on the air.
Well, and it's funny you say that because, I wrote the pilot on spec and I showed it to my agent. After working on it for a year, he says, it's not a TV show. And what he meant by that was like, it feels like a movie. And I was like, that's exactly why I want it to be on TV. It has like a real cinematic scope and vision to it. And I come from a feature background, so that's sort of what inspires me. So that was really exciting, and the network's really embraced the look of it.
And then I dragged him kicking and screaming into the TV.
Yes.
Everything he pitches, I'm like, we're not going to blow up the town today. So.
Did you see the activation across the street?
Yeah.
We drove by it, yeah.
Did you see the siren in the tank?
Yeah, I think she came from the East River.
She had that kind of look on her face.
Yeah.
You'd have to stop by,
Yeah.
So, after watching the pilot, there seemed to be a very, I guess, Twilight, I'm not sure if you guys seen the movie, it evoked like this very gray, like Washington feel, and I got the same feel from Siren. I guess, what are the inspirations, and do you guys kind of look towards other young adult series as an inspiration?
Twilight's definitely a huge one, and in the same way that they kind of reinvented a genre and a mythology with vampires, we're doing that with mermaids right now.
I didn't know the look was similar though. Did you know that? Because I haven't actually seen
it has that sort of like,
it's like a foresty gray.
Yeah, and our show is like set on the Olympic Peninsula, just like Twilight was.
Oh, it was?
Yeah.
Okay.
And an early influence for me in writing the pilot was obviously Jaws. And, it's funny because everyone thinks of Jaws as like this great monster movie, which it is, but it's also just a great portrait of this small town. And the characters are so alive, and there's humor. It was written by a comedy writer. And it's just so alive in that way. So we really embraced that.
So great to hear the laughs in the room. I had not seen a big audience watching it yet, and to see the laughs really,
it was interesting.
Really helped.
Yeah.
There's definitely good moments in there. I wanted to know about when you were developing, how much has it changed from what you first thought to what it is now?
The pilot, obviously you go through a development process where like stuff within scenes changes, but I think kind of the overall vibe, like thank God, really stayed intact, which is really rare and has not been my experience in movies. So that was amazing. It's always just so interesting. As a feature writer, you can wait 10 years to see your thing see the light of day. Now we're in the writer's room, and it's like they're shooting this like in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And you always have an idea.
Tomorrow.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. You always have a version in your head of how you think it's going to look, and sometimes it's different and better and more interesting than you imagined it. I think the casting of Eileen was like so critical for us. Like the show doesn't work if the mermaid doesn't work, and what she brought to it was so fascinating. She has 3 words in the pilot, and you can't take your eyes off her. So I think that's something that was a pleasant surprise.
Of television as well as sort of this collaboration. I'm sure it is in film too, but I've only worked in TV. And just the idea that everyone brings something completely different that maybe you didn't see.
Right.
Performance, direction. So it's so great about the world of television. A, you're making it quickly, you get to see it, you see what's working, you see what to adjust. And then everyone brings so much. Our production designers are so brilliant. So it's such a great collaborative medium. It's really wonderful.
I want to know if there's a whole underwater city there, or do they just, live like pods of whales, or how does that work?
We really wanted to base it as much as possible in science and marine biology. And so, a lot of times these shows, I feel like can get in trouble when they start expanding their mythology too much. And all of a sudden, like, oh, wait, this vampire has this new power that I didn't know about. I think that's when a show can kind of start to lose its course a little bit. So we want to keep it, our mythology very simple and grounded and sort of based as much as possible in science, I mean, for supernatural ideas. So there probably won't be an Atlantis down there. But we want to play life under the water. Like, look at what is the social structure? What is their language like? How do they communicate? I mean, recently data's come out that dolphins actually are having conversations with one another. To kind of pull as much as that as we can from real life as possible.
I think the core sort of important thing for us is to look at the human world from an outside view as well. And we really want to shine a light on what's going on the planet and in many other ways. And in human relationships, with totally fresh eyes. So in that way, we get to bring that culture to us and see it from it's not so much to me as about like what's going on down there. We're interested in that, but also seeing our own cultures from completely fresh eyes.
Did you encounter any challenges while writing a scene that involved maybe underwater shooting and the actors and technical difficulties, or maybe what you wrote wouldn't be as possible when you went to actually go shoot it?
Yeah, I mean, in general, we try to write like the coolest version that we want to see, and the line producer in Vancouver screams and yells, and we say, get it done. But no, we try to be aware of the production constraints. We learned a lot in the pilot of what worked and didn't work. You want to talk about our tail adventures?
Yes, we tried in sort of conception of how are we going to make them look cool and real and like mermaids that don't look like they're in costumes. So we tried a lot of different things in the pilot unsuccessfully. We made tails for them, put them on, and it did not work. And we realized that the world of visual effects right now is so great and cool and brilliant. Why are we doing it that way? And we completely shifted gears to go to VFX under the water, because that's how we're going to make it look great and cool and new.
The digital tail allows us to make it look like it is absolutely not a person in a prosthetic tail. And we're able to do a silhouette that couldn't be human. They're able to move in a way, so we want to avoid that knee bend that you get a lot of times, and so we want them to move more like dolphins would move, and to, again, like it should look, like it's its own unique creature that couldn't just be a person in a costume.
And we have an amazing team. Including Eric has a great eye for it. You really have to, because he'll say to me like, "Oh my gosh, that's terrible," and I'll go, "Really? Where? Where's the knee bend? Or whatever else it is. That's not my thing.
Yeah.
It's his thing." And all these hundreds of people working on it, making it look fantastic and real. So I have a whole new appreciation of what we have to do.
Why the name change? In the first time, the series was called
The Deep.
The Deep.
I mean, I think just for a practical reason, there's another show called The Deep, so we had to change it. And we definitely went through a lot of different versions, but Siren, and it really came from the network, but it felt really evocative and right. And it's so funny because we were so attached to The Deep for a while, and now it's like, The Deep seems weird, and it seems like, oh, it's Siren,
Yeah, it feels more darker, men going to their deaths.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It says something.
Yeah.
You hear it, you know what it's about.
Yeah. And that's the definition of Siren that we're using, an alluring, dangerous female.
There's
No, I'm just kidding.
what was the process like in crafting, the mermaid itself? 'Cause I guess today a lot of people view them as like docile, mythical creatures, but you guys go with the more predator aspect for mermaids. What was the process behind creating that?
So, that was really the origin of the idea. That was sort of the piece that intrigued me. One of my favorite movies is Jaws, and just love, the quality of the town there, but also, I think it was the Pirates of the Caribbean movie On Stranger Tides that just come out, and they sort of had a new spin on the mythology. So it was just kind of marrying those ideas, and it just felt so interesting to take this classic mythology that is such sort of, at times been a very lighthearted mythology, and give it that darker spin. And the original Little Mermaid is a dark story, and a lot of the mermaid myths and cultures around the world, there's a darkness to it that's
been
interesting to
studying
explore.
the myths and hoping to use the stories of all of the culture all over the world, what they think, and sort of sneak it into story as we move forward. So the people who do know about it and understand it will see the story in there, and others who don't, it'll just be a great story.
What's interesting is that you do subvert those tropes. So, mermaids are supposed to be pretty and like kind of like sexy, but these are predators. And you see in the beginning these men panicking and in fear,
Right.
and it's a female presence that is there that's being a predator towards them. Another thing I noticed about is the editing. Like when he's talking about mermaids, you see the kid and you think that the kid's going to be attacked, but the kid's not attacked.
Yeah.
And it's is there a conscious effort to subvert as many tropes, or that just kind of that's the story? Like that's.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's really exciting that we talk about in the writers' room a lot is like we want stuff in this show that could not be in any other show. And that's really fun to think of those moments. I mean, in terms of the editing, I think it kind of goes back to that wanting that cinematic quality to it, which is, it's not the typical overlit TV medium shots. Like we're going for, a more interesting style in that way.
And the town is a character as well, so we're trying to shoot it in a way that the world is part of the show and a character. It couldn't take place anywhere, and so we want to feel that. And as we move towards more character-based stuff, there's only a certain amount of VFX and mermaids and all of that. So the stories and the characters in that town really have to fill up the show in a way. So that's something we're leaning to the same way.
Oh, okay. There seems to be a lot of history within the pilot episode about the town and the relationship with mermaids. Would it be safe to say we can expect some sort of flashback throughout with the early encounters of men and mermaids?
I wouldn't say they'd be flashbacks to the earlier stories, but we will unfold those stories in the stories of the town. They will have reverberated through the history of the town and the family history. Ben's family and the other families who live there are all aware, and maybe what they've heard is partly true and not completely true, and we'll sort of unfurl those stories as we go.
The town has its folklore, and the actual story is a lot more darker and twisted than sort of the light version that the town sells its tourists.
Dark and twisted is the way to go.
Yeah, right?